Hello there, my name's Cademan, and I'm hungry. Hello. Yes, I would like to order a pizza. What toppings do I want? Bacon, sausage, throw on some shrimp. Oh no, I gotta run!
This is the police! Come out with your hands up! You're under arrest for ordering the least kosher pizza in the history of pizza!
Hello, and welcome to the Narrow Gate. Thank you for squeezing in here just like I squeezed out of prison. And thank you for tuning in to my second video on the Sermon on the Mount. Do not think I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commandments and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. If you're like me, you might be a little bit confused by these passages. Thinking about it kind of seems like maybe Jesus is saying that we should still follow the law, particularly in verse 19. And to almost give you a spoiler for the rest of this video, I will go ahead and say I do not entirely know what exactly Jesus' intention was in saying what he said. However, I do think I have a couple theories to offer you, so we'll run down those and you can tell me what you think. So, my first theory I want to lay out is that when Jesus first starts talking about the law, he says the law and the prophets. Now, the law and the prophets was a term that would be used to describe the Old Testament in the time. So maybe what Jesus is saying here is something like the Old Testament is still relevant. However, I would like to also say that in verse 19, where he says those who fail to keep the least of these commandments and teach others to also do so, he doesn't use the term law, but he uses the term commandments. So that sounds like he's actually talking about rules that are laid out in the Old Testament. So what I want to say here is that Paul makes it very clear that we don't have to sacrifice anymore because Jesus was the sacrifice. So we don't have to worry about that. That we know for sure. But maybe what Jesus is talking about here by the least of these commandments might be something like the dietary rules that the Jewish people were under.
It's overkill, Master.
Maybe I shouldn't have ordered that shrimp and bacon pizza. Now, I don't like that to be the case because I, of course, like everyone else, love bacon. However, if the Bible was saying that, then I, of course, would want to do what was God's will for us. So maybe that's the case, but maybe it's not, because something else that we have to remember is that right here, Jesus was talking to the Jewish people prior to his death on the cross. And particularly in the case of Paul, later passages of the Bible do seem to try to point away from the old law. So I think at the end of the day, we can't necessarily say that Jesus wants us to follow the old law. Now, I will say I personally think there are a lot of elements of the old law that are very practical and should be followed today. But I think the more important takeaway from this passage is that Jesus is telling us that there is still value in the Old Testament, and Jesus is actually coming as a part of the Old Testament. It's not like Jesus has come now, so we should completely ignore the entirety of the Old Testament. And last but not least, I think this is really the cherry on the top of the ice cream sundae, is that you cannot save yourself through the law. Because even the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, your righteousness would have to surpass them in order to get you into the kingdom of heaven. And it's like, these people are the people who followed the law to the T. Now, there is something to be said about how they misinterpreted the law in many ways, and that, I think, is an entirely different conversation. But I believe what Jesus is trying to get at here is just simply that it is not through us following the law that will get us to heaven, but it is Jesus. Even if we look back at verse 19, right there, what he says is that if you don't follow the least of the commandments, you have the lowest position in heaven, but yet you are still there. So whether or not you make it there doesn't have much to do with following the law. But, like I said before, it doesn't seem to be very clear entirely exactly what Jesus is saying here. So I would love to hear your opinion. Do you think that we shouldn't be eating bacon and shrimp pizza? Speaking of, that's the pizza right there. Goodbye, and thank you for watching. And if you like this video, maybe I'll give you a pizza. And if you subscribe, maybe I'll give you 2 pizzas.